Madeleine McCann vanished, and what shocked the world most wasn't her disappearance, but the attitude of her own family during the investigation. Picture a silent room, dim light, and a heavy curtain, the kind that muffles sound and hides what's behind it. It's slightly ajar, just a sliver of light escapes. On the other side, the perfect public image, a grieving family, anguished parents, surrounded by camera flashes and words of support. But here, in this space where the curtain hasn't fully opened, there's something that's never been shown. Because when a child disappears, the normal thing is to cooperate, to scream, run, beg for help. But what does it mean when the parents themselves start raising barriers, refusing police requests, limiting information? That's exactly what happened in the case of Madeleine McCann. What began as a desperate search suddenly turned into a silent war between the family and the investigators. And this shift wasn't random. It left signs, subtle, uncomfortable, hard to ignore. The question lingering in the air is, what is this curtain really hiding? In one of the most high-profile cases of recent decades, what should have been an alliance, parents and police working together, became a minefield of tension. The McCann family, who in the first week seemed open, present, willing, began to pull back. And not just a little. They refused reenactments, denied access to data, avoided direct questions, changed spokespeople, cut ties with investigators. Was it just fear, a survival instinct, or was there something bigger and riskier that needed protecting? This isn't just a police mystery. It's a narrative carefully built, piece by piece, under the world's watchful eyes. And understanding why cooperation turned into silence might be the only way to truly grasp what this case means. It's at this point, when silence starts speaking louder, that everything becomes heavier, more unsettling, more real. There's a specific moment when the trust between the McCann family and the Portuguese police just breaks. It's not an explosion, it's a muffled noise, almost imperceptible, but it changes everything from that point on. And that's exactly where we're diving in now. This is the part of the story almost no one dared to investigate. If this is already stirring something in you, if it sparked that subtle unease deep in your mind, then stick with me, because what's coming next isn't easy to hear, but it might completely change how you see this case. And if we're going to look again, let's do it with the right eyes. It was the fourth day after the disappearance. Praia da Luz seemed frozen in time. Helicopters overhead, journalists jostling for space on the sidewalk, volunteers with Madeleine's posters. Amid this chaos, the McCanns, hand in hand, faces tense, gazes steady. They said what everyone expected to hear. We're cooperating with the police. We just want our daughter back. And in those first days, that's exactly what happened. They gave interviews, made statements, spoke to international media. Everything seemed aligned with the behavior of desperate parents. But if you look closely, closer than the camera showed, you'll see tiny cracks, the unease in their glances, the exact repetition of phrases as if memorized. The moment the mother says, "Nobody did this to her," before any evidence pointed to anyone. These are details that don't scream, but they nag. Gradually, their cooperative stance gave way to barriers. They began refusing to do a reenactment of the events, avoided handing over personal items, requested certain questions be submitted in writing, behavior that, for any ordinary citizen, would raise a red flag. But something shielded the McCanns. They were doctors, British, educated, photogenic, an impeccable family, and that shaped not only the media's perception, but society's as a whole. After all, how do you suspect someone already suffering so much? This is where something few want to admit comes in. There's a collective idea of what acceptable grief looks like, what makes pain believable. We expect mothers to cry in public, fathers to shout for justice, families to throw themselves body and soul into the investigation. When that doesn't happen, something feels off. And that discomfort started to grow, as if the curtain of initial empathy was beginning to part, slowly, quietly, but revealing that maybe what was behind it wasn't exactly what we wanted to see. Over time, that exemplary cooperation turned into calculated silence. The Portuguese police at first fully trusted the parents, but that changed fast. They started noticing inconsistencies. The timelines of the checks on Madeleine's room didn't add up. One friend of the couple said one thing, another said something else. And the McCanns themselves seemed uneasy with direct questions. When the police asked for their phone records, they refused. When a new interrogation was suggested, silence, distance. This is when the investigation hit an invisible wall, a shield. It wasn't physical, it was symbolic. The shield of reputation, of the fear of looking guilty, of the terror of being judged for a mistake, even an unintentional one. An emotional shield that grew stronger than any willingness to help. And here we need to pause, breathe, because the story stops being just a police case. It becomes a human drama, layered with complexity. Many say, if it were me, I'd do everything. But would you really? Could we handle having every step questioned on national TV? Going to bed one night and waking up to the whole world thinking you know more than you're saying? Nietzsche said, every truth is a necessary illusion. Sometimes hiding a piece of reality is the only way someone finds to survive it. And that doesn't mean the McCanns are guilty, but it also doesn't mean they're completely transparent. What this story shows, in a raw, unsettling way, is that pain doesn't always come with absolute honesty. And the fear of being misunderstood can be as paralyzing as guilt. This is the part of the curtain that starts to move, and it doesn't reveal a final scene. It reveals emptiness, absence. What was missing? Not just in Madeline's room, but in the narrative built from the start. And once you notice that emptiness, it's impossible to pretend it's not there. The image was still the same, a calm-looking couple in understated clothes with controlled expressions and focused speeches. But gradually, something stopped adding up. It wasn't just what they said, it was what they didn't say. And above all, what they refused to show. The Portuguese police asked for their phones, their message logs, access came haltingly. That won't be provided. It's unnecessary. It's not the police's business. As if, suddenly, the search for their daughter had limits and conditions. This is when the heavy curtain began to shift. From the outside, it looked like mere caution. But inside, investigators started sensing something else. Control. A kind of protection that was no longer about the girl. It was about reputation. Why won't they hand over the data? One agent asked quietly. The silence that came back weighed heavier than any accusation. The trust, already fragile, shattered completely. It felt like a parallel narrative was being written, carefully edited. One that needed to keep a single image intact. That the pain was real, yes, but it could never be questioned. And so, what was meant to be a joint effort turned into a tug-of-war. The investigation hollowed out. Requests were ignored. Lawyers took over. And the couple's public image remained pristine. While their cooperation, that was what truly vanished. But was it just fear? Or was there something more behind that shield? Over time, the refusal stopped looking like precaution and started resembling armor. It wasn't just about protecting pain anymore. It was about protecting a narrative. As if, at some point, total exposure had become more dangerous than the loss itself. The curtain parted a bit more, and what it revealed wasn't an explicit conspiracy, but a carefully staged scene, a theater where every appearance, every press conference, every gesture followed a script. The pain was real. No one questioned that, but there was something rehearsed there. As if spontaneity had been replaced by strategy, their refusal to cooperate with the police wasn't an isolated act. It was part of a pattern. Choosing spokespeople, controlling the press, threatening lawsuits against journalists, as if everything needed to pass through a filter, as if keeping the story in check was more important than risking losing it to find the full truth. "What are they afraid of?" a reporter whispered, watching yet another press conference devoid of answers. And that might be the question that echoes to this day. Fear of being blamed, fear of judgment, or fear of opening doors they'd never be able to close. Jung's archetype of the shadow is what we hide most from ourselves, what we protect so fiercely that without realizing it traps us. Maybe the McCann's silence wasn't just pain. Maybe it was that shadow trying to shield what couldn't be seen. And here the story becomes something else. It stops being just about a girl's disappearance and becomes about the disappearance of something even harder to find. Trust. Not every scream has sound, and not every silence is innocent. What comes next is what changes everything. What seemed like deliberate distancing, a block against the truth, now starts to reveal another layer. One that doesn't justify, but explains. Because while on one side there was public pain, on the other there was something more delicate, the fear of crumbling inside. For months, the McCann family was accused of detachment, but trauma psychology shows that not all pain erupts in tears. Some freezes, and it was in this emotional ice that the narrative began to crack. The refusal to share data, to answer questions, to pursue certain lines of investigation, it all started being seen not just as strategy, but as defense. Not legal defense, existential defense. One Portuguese officer said in an interview, "They were there, but it was like they'd built a cocoon around themselves. Nothing got in, not even us. That cocoon might have been the invisible shield created to preserve the only thing left, their image as parents. Because if even that was questioned, what would remain? And here's a dilemma no one likes to face. When the truth threatens what you still have, do you expose everything or protect what's left? The scenes of the couple in public felt rehearsed, but maybe they were just desperate attempts to seem steady. One journalist noted that backstage they barely exchanged words. Silence filled the space. And maybe that was the emotional pattern since the night of the disappearance. A void where answers should have been. An absence that spread even to how they dealt with pain. At this point, the truth doesn't seem like a matter of evidence anymore. It feels like an internal battle between what must be said and what can be endured. It's here that the curtain finally opens fully, but what it reveals isn't a confession or a solution. It's an empty space. Not empty of meaning, but of certainty. The public expected a final answer. Something like, they knew, or they hid it. But what emerges is something else. A portrait of human complexity, pain that paralyzes, the fear of being reduced to a mistake, shame that screams, even when the mouth stays shut. Psychology calls this
when the mind realizes
that speaking
silence
could destroy more than it saves, it shuts down. And that silence isn't just with others, it's with oneself. Viktor Frankl's words carry weight here. When we cannot change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Maybe the McCanns did that. Maybe they became public versions of themselves, adjusted, calculated, frozen. And the public, expecting raw pain, was met with restrained expressions, control, a performance of grief, and it judged. But was it wrong? Or was it just unable to accept that pain doesn't always show up the way we expect? The truth in this case might not be a final revelation, but a question that never quiets. What would you do if saying everything meant losing everything? The curtain, which guided this whole video, now reveals what was always hidden. Not a monster, not a secret, but a void. A space where there are no absolute answers. Just fragments of memory, trauma, and attempts to survive. And maybe in the end, that's the point. The McCann's silence might have been what remained after everything they'd already lost. Not an escape from the truth, but a way to keep standing. Now that you've seen this through different eyes, maybe the next step is to look at other stories with less judgment and more listening. Because the truth isn't always a confession. Sometimes it's just what's left when you can't keep pretending. The truth doesn't only show itself in what's said. Often it hides precisely in the silence, in the gesture that didn't happen, in the glance that avoids, in the body that freezes. The McCann family's story isn't linear. It's made of gaps, interrupted gestures, questions that seem too dangerous to ask. And in that space between what was said and what was avoided lies the unease, because we expect pain to follow a pattern, for grief to look like what the movies taught us. But when pain strays from the script, it unsettles. And what unsettles tends to be judged. The curtain that once concealed now reveals. And what it shows isn't a final scene with all the answers. It's a void, but not a meaningless one, a void that still pulses. Because sometimes what's missing in a story like this isn't another piece of evidence or another theory. It's courage. The courage to stop seeking comfort and face the pain as it came, unvarnished. Maybe the truth will never come the way we expect. Maybe it's already there, in what was never said. Now, I want to know what this stirred in you. Talk to me. What's lingering inside after all this? Show me your take on it. I'm curious to see how this hit you. It can be just a sentence, as long as it's real. Write it down. I'll read everyone. Sometimes we watch something like this thinking we'll find answers, but in the end, what stays is a different kind of clarity. Not the kind that resolves, but the kind that unsettles. Because when the truth threatens what we want to believe, the tendency is to look away. But some pains don't vanish when we ignore them. They just change shape and linger in every detail we pretend not to see. Maybe that's the biggest challenge. Accepting that understanding doesn't always mean certainty, but it's at least not running anymore. And if this video moves something inside you, don't stop here. The next content will take you even deeper, not chasing culprits, but questions no one dared answer, especially when the pain has a name, a face, and too much silence around it. If you want to keep going on this journey with me, subscribe now, because the next story I'm going to tell you will also break the surface and prod what's been hidden for too long. And before you go, there's something in the first pinned comment that'll make you see silence differently. It's not a ready answer. It's a missing piece. Because some stories touch and others awaken. This one was the kind that awakens.